Saints Row is an interesting franchise, and one that became very dear to my heart. Originally conceived as basically a GTA clone exclusive to the Xbox 360, the franchise would go on to create its own legacy and fanbase over the 5-game series. While Saints Row never really escaped the shadow of GTA, it did very well for itself for many years. And while they were never able to truly hit it out of the park, Saints Row still built up a very sizable and loyal fanbase that provided Volition a lucrative IP that would only grow in sales throughout the franchise's run. With Saints Row 1, Volition was able to sell over 1 million copies by the end of the release year in 2006. Saints Row 2 would sell 3.4 million units by the end of September 2021, and Saints Row the Third, which I don't know why they changed the naming convention, would go on to ship 5.5 million copies by the end of the year in 2021. Saints Row 4, titled Saints Row IV, another weird title convention change, would go on to be the final main installment in the original series and would also boast pretty solid sales from what we can tell. Now, Volition did keep the total number quiet on this game, but it shipped over 1 million copies within the first week of release in 2013, and this combined with the game's positive critical reception, I think it's a fair assumption to assume it went on to sell pretty well. The series though would go on to get one more game titled Saints Row Gat Out of Hell in 2015 that was much less favorably received, though still fun in its own right. This game was a standalone expansion and took the franchise to hell, literally, and went all in on the wackiness of Saints Row, going even crazier than the superpowers we had in Saints Row 4. Sales numbers for this one weren't released, but it's probably a fair assumption that this one did not sell well at all, considering how poorly it was received. At this point, from the outside looking in, it seemed like Saints Row might be done, as Volition's next game in 2017 was Agents of Mayhem, an open-world action-adventure game actually kind of similar to Saints Row, and also set in a parallel universe to the Saints Row series. This game would turn out to be both a critical and commercial flop, as the game would receive middling reviews and as of February 2017 had only sold 300,000 copies. In 2019 though, Saints Row fans were given some hope, as a new game was hinted to be in development by Volition, and that title would turn out to be the 2022 reboot simply titled Saints Row. Now, as you know, watching this video today, the Saints Row reboot did not hit, and sadly Volition was shut down roughly a year after the launch of the title, ending the studio that was founded back in 1993 as Parallax Software. Over the years, while Volition never had any games completely take over the gaming industry, they did have some very fun franchises like Saints Row and Red Faction, along with some various other franchises way back in the day. So was the Saints Row reboot really that bad? And was the shutdown of Volition deserved? Volition would release their reboot to the Saints Row series on August 23, 2022 worldwide, and while the game's pre-order sales actually exceeded the publisher's expectations, the game would get absolutely destroyed by reviewers and sales would seem to taper off pretty quickly. Most reviewers lambasted the bugginess of the game, dated feeling, and the lackluster story, all of which are very fair criticisms of the game. I personally actually completely avoided the game on release, even as a fairly decent Saints Row fan myself who had played all the previous games and really enjoyed them. But after seeing the early reception, I decided to just sit this one out. That was until recently, when the news of Volition being shut down hit. This kind of sparked some interest up in me to see, was the Saints Row reboot really that bad? Plus, I would be checking it out a year post-launch with the various DLCs that had been added on, and it was finally on Steam, so I didn't have to use the Epic Game Store. Woohoo! So is Saints Row really as bad as the billing? Well, to be honest, no. While some of the improvements in my playthrough definitely came in post-launch patches, and even some coming in the DLC, the roughly 65 that this game got on Metacritic does seem a little harsh to me. But does that mean I fell in love with the Saints Row reboot? No, not in the slightest. But for a 10 to 15 hour open world game where you can just go around mindlessly killing people and blowing stuff up, it isn't the worst time you can have. And the game definitely has its high points, which elevated the experience, especially in the state of the game today. Though I am to be clear, I definitely greatly benefited by not playing the launch version of the game, which at the time the Washington Post called barely playable. I think it's also worth noting that while the game is now on Steam, quite recently, as of like a month or so ago, it was a 1-year exclusive to Epic, which definitely hurt its sales numbers on PC, though we'll never really know how much. There is a statement from Embracer Group's CEO where he did state he expected the Saints Row reboot to end up being profitable, but shared his opinion that he had a lot of disappointment toward the project that came from the polarizing reception. Saints Row 2022 opens up with a character by the name of Antonio showing up to a party at the Saints Row mansion to try and propose a new business deal. Here the player will get to customize and create their character just like in previous Saints Row games, which gives plenty of options to the player to really hone in on what you want your boss to look like and even to a lesser degree sound like. Saints Row 2022 even includes a boss sharing system where you can actually browse other people's creations and transport them directly into your game, assuming you can afford all the various items that were used to create that character. This is actually a pretty cool system, and it was something that I thought was a cool addition to the franchise. As in a lot of other games, if you think about Starfield recently with ships, usually you just see people's cool creations on social media, and you don't have a way to properly make that in your own game without a step-by-step tutorial. So the boss sharing system in Saints Row was actually pretty cool. You literally just clicked a button and would buy all the items and it would create the character for you. You do all of this just with a simple code that you can share with your friends, and the game even has an in-game browsing system where you can just browse off of various filters. The only thing that was kind of weird I thought about this system is that if you're just browsing through the in-game browser, the characters don't have names. So if you make a character and you upload it, let's say you recreate John Cena or whatever other celebrity. When you upload them into the little file browser, it won't say the character's name and will instead just say the name of the creator, which can make it a little bit more annoying when you're just quickly browsing through because you basically just have to recognize every character, where sometimes if I was scrolling through it'd just be cool to, see the character names, since most of the higher rated ones were just literally recreations of other game characters or real life celebrities. Anyways, after creating your character, you see a short conversation between you and Antonio, where you basically just tell him like, I got a party to attend, we can talk business later. However, the party doesn't go as planned, and you end up waking up in the ground before the game decides to do that old classic in media where it rewinds a few months. So now you kind of know where the game is heading, let's figure out how we got there. At this point we get thrown into the back of a van where we're watching a promotional video for Marshall Defense Industries, who are the for-hire military firm in the Saints Row universe, and you're preparing for your first day on the job with this firm. After some very cringe dialogue, which is a staple in this game, between you and your supervisor Gwen, you learn of your main objective: to capture a deadly criminal known as Narwhali. Instantly, you can tell that this game leans pretty heavy into that over-the-top theme than maybe some of the original Saints Row games. Though to be fair, while I may prefer those original games, you can't deny the success that the franchise did see with some of the later titles like Saints Row the Third and Saints Row 4. One thing that will become immediately apparent is that the characters don't shut up. Now, over the course of the game, either they start to talk slightly less, or I might have just become so used to it that my brain did me a favor and just started to tune it out. But your character, along with any related characters during a mission, will just constantly quip to the point that it actively takes away from the experience that you're having. Eventually, after finding your way through the Wild West themed area, you catch up to Narwhali and attempt to capture him, though he runs off to the saloon, where Gwen informs you that the Marshall forces have actually pinned him down. In true Saints fashion though, Narwhali jumps onto a jet and ends up stealing it, attempting to escape. Gwen feeds you some dumb line about standing down because they don't have time for hero bullshit, but in fact you do have time for hero bullshit because it's always boss o'clock in Saints Row, and after throwing a hook that was attached to an APC onto the jet and being carried through the air, the APC eventually gets stuck, trapping the jet, leading to this weird set piece where you have to kill a bunch of enemies while laying on top of the now trapped jet. You'll actually see this mechanic used a lot throughout the game, where you basically just lay on top of cars and you'll shoot waves of enemies that are chasing you or just shooting at you. Luckily for you, Gwen complains the whole time in your ear about not standing down, and after mindlessly killing enough enemies, you trigger the next portion of the mission, where it's now the same thing, but instead you're dangling by one arm holding onto the jet. You just continue this until you hit the next trigger, getting a cutscene of a fight between you and the Narwhali. He basically beats the piss out of you until you kick a gun into one of the engines of the jet, causing it to crash and allowing the Marshall forces to come in and finally capture Narwhali. Thus completes the mission first fucking day, and your first taste of the glorious world of Saints Row 2022. And it only goes, well, I would say up from here, but I don't even know if that's true. Before we go down the path of the lackluster story though, we should dive a little bit deeper into the mechanics of the game. Saints Row is what you would expect it to be in this regard. A flashy, over-the-top, third-person action game with a variety of weapons and vehicles that the player can use to accomplish their various goals, both both in the main story and in the open world. My main playthrough of this game was on the Sensei difficulty, which is the second highest, and other than the occasional mission where you're stuck being the gunner of a vehicle, or when you're trying to steal quote-unquote an important vehicle, the game proposes very little actual challenge. Though I actually think this is probably to the benefit of the game, as the combat and gameplay do a solid enough job of letting you mindlessly kill your way through the campaign. Or if it was a lot more difficult, I think it would just be frustrating. Saints Row's gameplay isn't some riveting experience worthy of a 10-hour video essay breaking down all the intricacies, and that's why I kept mine to a short 1 hour plus, but it does do a good job of letting you kick back and just run your way through a game in a way that some overly complicated games these days don't let you just jump right in. Your enjoyment or lack thereof when playing Saints Row will pretty much boil down to how much you enjoy the core combat loop, because as I mentioned earlier, the story is not going to do anything to keep you around. All this said, most of the combat in this game consists of just picking your favorite weapon, or weapons if you have multiple, and just constantly hitting ADS, so the game will use this little soft lock mechanic on enemies, and then you just slightly flick up your crosshair onto their head, hold down the trigger some more, and pray Bloom doesn't make you completely miss. Occasionally, you avoid some damage with the roll ability, or just move around to play around various special enemies' abilities, like some of the enemies that can block bullets and things like that. The main thing breaking up the flow of combat is going to be your use of the takedown mechanic, which are quite literally just Doom glory kills, but in Saints Row for some reason. These takedowns even regenerate health, similar to the glory system in Doom. You also have up to 4 various abilities that you can pick from that you unlock throughout the game, so for the most part it really does come down to hit ADS, let it flick for you, push that crosshair up near their head, and then just shoot, and hope it hits, or don't even bother aiming toward the head and just hold down the trigger and just kill them with body shots. Shooting in this game, if it wasn't obvious, is not very precise, especially earlier in the game, as the lower level your guns are, the less accurate they are. Towards the end of the game, once you max out a weapon like the assault rifle or whatever weapon you decide to go with, you can start more accurately popping heads, but it's kind of a bummer that it takes a few amount of hours to really get to that level of precision where the gunplay starts to feel responsive. One thing that I really found was a disappointment throughout my playthrough was the lack of wacky or cool guns, as I feel like that's something the later Saints Row games really leaned into and really made those games kind of unique and fun. As for the most part, as I played through Saints Row, I mostly just used very standard weaponry, your assault rifles, your SMGs, your pistols, and RPG, and there were little spins to this with some things like the LARPing guns that I'll mention a little bit more about later, and some of the DLC would go on to add some of the wackier style guns like the Pain and Gain gun, but for the regular playthrough, just playing through the standard campaign, you really don't find many of those cool and wacky guns. I think you can get some if you go out of your way, if you do some of the side objectives to unlock them, but just playing through the standard game, you're playing with standard weapons. Another issue that the game has is a struggle that a lot of games have when you can max out a weapon, and that's that after sinking like $150,000 into maxing out a gun, well, any other gun you switch to is just gonna feel like a downgrade. Now, can you make more of an effort to, try out different guns and try and vary up your own playthrough? For sure, but the way the game is designed, it really incentivizes you to just use these same 1 or 2 maxed out weapons over and over and over, otherwise you're going to be spending a whole lot of cash upgrading a whole variety of weapons, which means you have less money to upgrade other things or to buy criminal ventures. Along with the guns, the game does have a variety of melee weapons, though the melee combat is not overly deep. We're talking a light attack and a heavy attack, with my experience being that the heavy attack usually isn't even worth winding up, with the risk reward of the damage that it actually outputs versus, not just getting hit when you're trying to wind it up. That said though, using the melee weapons, I did find a fun change of pace to just smack people with something like a carnival hammer or various other funky melee weapons that you will pick up throughout your playthrough. For some reason, the game also has it set up so that you can just hit a hotkey and instantly snap and shoot an explosive barrel in an area. I'm not sure why the devs thought we couldn't spot these explosive barrels on our own, or if they just felt we were too dog shit to aim at them, but yeah, you literally just click a button and it'll auto aim and auto shoot them for you, which is just an odd design choice. Throughout the game, you're also able to unlock special abilities for some of the various different weapons in the game by completing a specific challenge tied to that gun, which is actually something they added for vehicles too. I went back and looked while I was writing the script for this video, and throughout my 15 hours playing this game through the main campaign and the DLC, I finished one of those weapon challenges, and that was for the assault rifle, and the special ability isn't even something very fun. It's kind of a passive that just makes the assault rifle stronger as you're using it. Now I will admit, that is on me because I never went out of my way to complete them, but kind of just figured it was worth mentioning that unless you go out of your way to complete these challenges, you're probably not gonna. The weapons also have some customizability in the form of different skins and colors if that's your jam, allowing you to swap out different designs and colors for your arsenal of weapons. The gunplay overall isn't horrible, but it's also not anything spectacular, and it's definitely not something that I would consider a strength of the game, which is a reoccurring theme of the mechanics in the game. Throughout the entire game, I think my favorite strategy was to just quickscope people, as the sniper one-shots most of the enemies in the game, and with the weird aim softlock mechanic, the game makes you feel like a COD trickshotting god. Were you ever not good enough to be on FaZe back in the day? While playing Saints Row, you will be. Was this the most effective way to approach combat? Probably not, but it was certainly an enjoyable way for me, and that's what matters. Those takedowns that I mentioned earlier have a ton of different animations, and at first they felt pretty cool, but after a couple hours in, I literally dreaded having to use them to regenerate health, just because of how long they would take and how much they ruined the pace of combat with the overly exaggerated and lengthy animations. Whoever animated these or came up with the ideas must also be like a giant WWE fan, because 90% of them look straight ripped out of Monday Night Raw. These animations are also hilarious because even a year plus into the game, they still bug out on a fairly consistent basis, and you either end up with completely messed up camera angles where you can't see what's going on, or you're just floating in the air while you perform this elaborate takedown. On top of this, they are extra hilarious because as soon as you click the takedown button, every enemy just stops shooting you, and they just sit there and watch you play wrestling with their buddy and don't resume combat until you're totally complete. Very considerate of them, if I'm being honest, but also pretty stupid, though dying mid-animation would have also been pretty stupid. So it's kind of a catch-22. There's also this weird bug or just interaction where sometimes when I would end my takedown, my screen would just randomly flick or jerk into a direction that I was not trying to look at, which sometimes caused me to walk into damage or roll in the wrong direction. One time I fell off a bridge and I was so unbelievably tilted. With your takedowns and guns, the game also provides you a chance to unlock a variety of abilities that I mentioned earlier, and you can equip up to 4 of these that you can use during combat. This ranges from things just like a basic frag grenade to gaining a bunch of health. There's also some more unique abilities in there, but in all reality, I think the most useful one I found was just the one that gave me extra health, as I could pop it before a big fight and go in with some extra health, or pop it when I was taking a bunch of damage to get a little health boost and avoid dying. One of the first abilities that you will unlock though is actually kind of fun, and it's where you take an enemy and you stuff a frag into the person's belly and then you just chuck them, killing them and blowing up all the stuff around them. It's pretty comical and actually does have some uses, as at that point in the game you don't actually just have regular frag grenades yet, and there's also abilities that I use like the fire punch that were pretty fun throughout the playthrough. It's also worth noting that the abilities and the takedowns, generally, especially the takedowns, cannot be used on an enemy when they still have armor, and that's signified on the enemy's health bar, so you have to pop the armor and then you can use the takedown, or you can use some of the abilities on them depending on the specific ability. Another issue that the game's combat has, if we're just being honest, is that the enemies are really boring. Regardless of which faction you're fighting, for the most part the regular enemies play almost identical. They kind of just come at you like hordes and you shoot them. Some shoot back, some run at you with melee weapons, but there's no complex fights here. You're not having to outsmart AI or anything like that, and so after a while it does get a little samey. Now each faction does have some special units that will change up the playstyle a little bit, but in most cases those were just slightly tankier enemies with that additional armor bar, or an enemy that might have a unique ability or a weapon. I would have loved to see more of a variety in the standard enemies along with the unique enemies to really vary up that gameplay from faction to faction. The game also has a variety of boss fights and mini boss fights, and to be honest, they aren't even really worth mentioning. You just mag dump your weapon into them or shoot a couple RPGs at them and then you call it a day. On par with one might consider a boss fight many years ago, but these days when you compare these boss fights to the well-crafted and mechanic-rich boss fights of something like Elden Ring or Armored Core, well, it's not even worth comparing. To complement and break up the on-foot monotony of Saints Row, it also has vehicle sections, which fall into a variety of categories: driving across the boring city, flying across the boring city, driving driving away from enemies, and being driven away from enemies. Of these, the most engaging is being driven away from enemies, and this will be something that you will tackle in the main story from time to time and on various different story missions. Remember those frustrating GTA levels where the NPC slowly drives you away from an objective while you have to kill all the enemies chasing after you? That's exactly what this is. Though Volition understood these sections could be annoying and rough, and were kind enough to give you unlimited ammo most of the time, which means unlimited explosives and RPGs, so a lot of times I would just shoot endless RPGs at all the people chasing us. And I don't know if that's how they imagined these sections would go, but it definitely made them the least frustrating. Driving in this game also isn't anything to write home about, but if you're fine with arcadey open world driving, then this will do the trick, and there are a decent variety of vehicles that you can collect and store in your garage and also customize them, along with all the vehicles that you will actually unlock during the main and side missions. One thing I always found very weird though is regardless what car you are driving, even if it's the fastest car in the game, enemies chasing you will always rubber band and catch up to you, which can make some of those chase sections annoying at times, as it's basically just a constant case of enemy catches up, you shoot them or you sideswipe them or you ram into them, and then those enemies blow up or fall behind and then they catch up again, or a new one spawns and catches up, until either you end up dying eventually or you just reach your destination. Cars also have unlockable abilities similar to guns that you can unlock by completing a specific challenge depending on the vehicle, and vehicles also have very extensive customization that allows you to really make your vehicles your own in terms of appearance, or you can also choose to upgrade their stats. I will say once I unlocked the helipad and the first helicopter, I basically stopped driving anywhere in the city and would instead just always travel back to the helicopter and fly everywhere because it was faster, and I never really felt that I was missing out on much by not driving, unless it literally made me drive or was during the middle of a mission. For the most part, this sums up the core gameplay loop of Saints Row, with some random mechanics I didn't mention, like NPCs being able to call the cops or enemies being able to call in reinforcements, mostly because it was really half-baked and I'm not sure if it ever even affected me, and if it did, I didn't notice. Saints Row, along with the ability tree that you unlock just by leveling up, also sports a perk system where you unlock some various perks and then you can pay for slots to use these perks. These perks, while not game-changing, can give you some pretty decent passives that can buff your character in substantial ways. However, unlocking additional perk slots becomes very expensive very fast, so unless you are farming a lot of side content or you've built up a lot of that passive income, you're probably only going to have 2 to 4 of these by the time you finish the main story. For reference, I think I had 3. Saints Row really runs off that beautiful green paper. From student loans to rent to cars to guns to upgrades, it all costs cash, which you can earn in a slew of different ways. Main missions, side missions, bounties, side hustles, various POIs around the open world, along with business ventures that you can build, providing you with passive income over time. Each criminal venture has a specific cost to build and then provides an hourly income which can be bumped up by completing the venture specific requirements. This is actually a pretty good way to start raking in some serious cash. Once you get a few of these going, you just have to remember to pull up the phone and collect money from the Cash app. Speaking of apps, in true 2010s fashion, the whole game's UI is based around the concept of a smartphone, which doesn't really matter other than the fact that it is really annoying when you try and use it and someone shoots you, since the game doesn't pause when you're in the phone. The phone is basically your gateway to all things in Saints Row, from the map with all the icons telling you exactly where to go, along with the phone being where you start all of the main inside missions. You're going to be accessing your phone very often throughout your playthrough, and unlike other open world games where you can kind of venture around more naturally, in Saints Row you literally just go from icon to icon. Now, the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about much and mostly skirted around is the open world, which leaves a ton to be desired. Being a reboot, Saints Row 2022 takes place in a brand new city called Santo Ileso, which according to the wiki is modeled after Las Vegas, though I don't know if that's just some bullshit on the wiki or if they said this somewhere, because I would agree, this is a city set in the desert, but besides that, it doesn't really give me Vegas vibes at all. There's no big strip area, and hell, even San Andreas had a city back in 2004 that felt a heck of a lot more like Vegas than Santo Ileso does. The city alone poses a big problem, as the whole thing just seems so uninspired and boring, and it really does just feel like a generic city plopped out in the desert, and the game does nothing to try and make it feel more alive when you're exploring around. In many cases, the open world feels completely dead and lifeless, and outside of going to those specific points on your map, there's no reason to just venture around and explore. Saints Row's open world feels dated by probably 10 years, and after finishing the game and playing through the DLCs, I couldn't even recreate collect many points on the map. I literally would just follow the giant GPS arrows telling me exactly where to go, and as the game went on, I avoided most of this just by using fast travel or helicopters whenever possible. The other elephant in the room is the technical state of Saints Row. On release, Saints Row was completely panned for its lack of polish and abundance of bugs. However, I will say that playing the game a year and 3 DLCs later, most of this is the key word, has been ironed out. But some of that general jank does certainly still persist. Animations are pretty poor or misplaced, especially with the takedown system. Bodies of my enemies would sometimes disappear, leaving around a floating head that you had to fight. Cars seem like they completely lacked audio at times. Lip syncing during cutscenes is laughable, and some of the missions would just straight up bug out, forcing you to reset to a previous checkpoint to be able to complete them. And one time I even had a side mission where I showed up and it just completed itself. None of this was truly game breaking, but seeing as this was the state of the game today over a year after launch, I can only imagine what this game was like on day one. Saints Row's story also does the game absolutely no favors, as it feels like the writers really didn't know what they wanted to do for a lot of it, and it feels so thrown together. After capturing Narwhali in the first mission that we spoke about earlier, you actually find out that you've been denied your precious performance bonus due to your work on the job. You go back to your apartment and meet up with your friends Eli, Kevin, and Nina, and you learn a little bit about what your friends get up to with their free time, which, unsurprising to anyone, is a variety of criminal activities. Nina is affiliated with the local gang Los Panteros, and Kevin is affiliated with the other nice and friendly local anarchist group, the Idols. As we get further into this cutscene though, we get possibly the greatest quote from the entire game.
I don't have to love it, I have to pay my student loans.
Amen.
A striking reminder that just like in real life, you also have crippling student debt in the game. A real relatable moment for the Saints Row crew. Unfortunately, due to you losing your performance bonus earlier, you and the crew have to come up with another idea to try and make some cash to avoid being evicted from your apartment. So like all good petty criminals, the crime of the day is robbing a payday loan location, because in Santo Eliso, nobody likes payday loan establishments, just like in real life. After a nice burglary and little runaway from the cops, you show up to the junkyard to find out that the Panteros have actually stolen your getaway car. That's okay though, because like all things in video games, there is a conveniently placed dirt pike for you to hop onto until you end up hitting a spike strip set down by the cops, causing you to end up crashing your bike. Nina shows up though right in the nick of time to save you in her prized car, though worth mentioning at this point that Nina is still working with the Panteros and is worried that they're gonna find out about what has gone on. After this, we return to our job as a Marshall employee, where our next task is to follow a Panteros convoy and report back to Gwen, which we learned during some fantastic dialogue between the two characters.
I mean, per the roommate code, I'm gonna have to fold her laundry for 2 weeks, but beyond that, I'm golden.
Anyways, as I'm sure you would have guessed, just following the convoy doesn't go to plan, and you end up having a full-on convoy heist involving some very B-action movie-esque jumps as you go from car to car all the way up to the front of the convoy until you can be rescued. While this mission is definitely a cool spectacle, it is extremely on rails and ends up in you taking out the entire convoy and retrieving a stolen Mayan artifact known as the Hummingbird Codex. This would go on to be a very important item throughout the game, so it's going to come back up. Company founder Atticus Marshall is greatly pleased with you and praises your stellar performance, even promoting you to the head of the museum's security to unveil the codex, much to the dismay of Gwen, who definitely hates your guts. During this unveiling though, things do not go to plan, and the Panteros show up to take the codex back. A huge fight ensues with them and the Idols, who also show up, deciding they want a little bit of that codex action. Not gonna lie, every time I look at the main members of the Idols with their little LED masks on, all I can think of is that dude from Watch Dogs 2, Wrench, who I'm pretty sure everyone made fun of. And honestly, you probably should make fun of the Idols too, so it's completely on brand. The mission even includes a fancy escort section, so it's like a little slice of Overwatch in your Saints Row adventure. I understand. Team Fortress players, I know you did payload first, but just let me have this line, alright? Just let me have it. As the mission continues, you end up saving the life of Marshall board member Myra Starr. However, in the process, you fail to protect the codex and end up being fired by Atticus for your performance, who doesn't actually care how many people die as long as you complete the task. Now broke, depressed, and jobless, just like all of us in real life, you struggle to get out of bed the following day until you find out that your friends Kevin and Eli are currently at an Idols party that is about to be attacked by Los Panteros. You show up just in time to save the day in your boxers, or completely naked if you decide decided to go commando when you were creating your character. But not before Eli ends up getting shot. Kevin is put in a predicament where he has to choose between his gang, the Idols, and you guys, his friends, as one of their leaders demands Kevin kill you and the others. Kevin obviously chooses you over the Idols, immediately causing a fight to break out, and you're tasked to take down the Idol collective member, then fleeing the location with one of those fantastic car driving sections that we spoke about earlier. Luckily, Eli turns out okay, even though you did have to skip the hospital due to lack of health insurance. I mean, relatable. And then you and your friends have the revelation that you should just have your own gang instead of helping out the other factions. A true be your own boss moment. Following this decision, the gang determines they need an HQ that isn't the apartment, so they set their eyes on an abandoned church in town. After some destruction and a little intimidation, the church is yours in all its glory, though the Idols do show up and try and crash the party. From here, the game opens up a little bit, and I spent a good time just doing various side missions and ventures before really progressing the story any further, though we would return soon enough when we find out that Los Panteros have stolen Nina's prized car, which was actually her late mother's from back home. Well, after a lot of killing in true Saints Row fashion and a funny section where you torture a guy by badly modifying his car, you set off to the quarry in a last-ditch attempt to save Nina's car. This is to no avail though, as you show up just as they dump the car into a giant pit, leading to Nina being distraught and vowing to get revenge.
Let's go. We can still catch up to him.
Nah, if Sergio's gonna fuck with my family, I'm gonna fuck with his.
The whole scene for me just missed the mark, as while I get the car is supposed to have some sentimental value to Nina, it attempts to be so serious in a game that so far has been anything but, which is something the story struggles with throughout the whole game. While most of the writing is very on the nose, occasionally the game will try and take things a little more serious, and all of those moments just feel out of place. After this, you take a trip to Boot Hill, which is this deathmatch style arena game show, and while this is unimpactful to the story itself, other than recruiting some new Saints members, this area would go on to be the main idea behind one of the game's DLCs that we'll talk about more later. Getting back to the main story, Kevin ends up getting kidnapped by the Idols and we have to go and save him, which includes a pretty funny moment where after killing a whole group of Idols, we find one remaining in a porta potty, so you attach the porta potty to the back of your car and drag it around until he finally tells us where Kevin is. And Kevin is actually at the top of the big Santo Eliso sign, which I thought the city was modeled after Vegas, not LA, but whatever, where it turns out he's actually strapped at the very top with bombs all over the sign that they're trying to blow up. So you have about 8 minutes to trek across town while various Idol members attempt to stop you from making it there. Once you arrive, you learn there are 5 bombs you need to disarm within the time limit, with the last bomb right behind Kevin, who waits at the top tied to a chair without his shirt on, just like usual. After you complete this, to get revenge on the Idols for doing this, you wingsuit down to their mansion, which is conveniently right below, and crash a party, mercilessly killing all of the Idols that are there. The level ends with you killing another collective member, which are those mini bosses from the Idols with their fancy masks on. These are nothing too special enemy wise though, other than just having more health. After you defeat the collective member, Kevin thanks you for the rescue and it's back to the plan. After some more slightly unrelated missions and side quests, we take a call from Nina, who now has a plan to get revenge on Los Panteros for destroying her car. Here we find ourselves heading straight to the Los Panteros headquarters to destroy their forge, which is what they use to build all their fancy cars and whatever else they build. The mission concludes with Nina driving the leader of Los Panteros' monster truck by the name of Sergio straight into the forge, blowing up the monster truck and the headquarters in the process. You then have to fight off some enemies while Nina fixes up the getaway car, and then you and Nina make your timely escape. After this comes probably the strongest set of missions in the game, and that is mostly because it is completely unrelated to the game's story and allowed the riders some true flexibility with its wackiness. Eli recruits you to help him in a citywide LARP tournament that he takes a part in, and the quest chain starts out with you and Eli leveling up characters until you find out that you have the opportunity to defeat Gwen, who is that martial supervisor from earlier that you despise. While this mission chain has nothing to do with the overall story of the game, the amount of care and love put into these missions, with a completely unique weapon set, vehicles, and takedown animations along with death animations to all fit the LARPing premise, is extremely cool. Here, instead of killing people, you'll find your character just fake killing them since it's a LARP, so you'll use things like fake punches or Nerf style weapons, and they'll fall over in funny fashion going like, ah, I died. And there's even this hilarious stealth section where your character takes a stealth potion, and to signify this, you just cross your arms, which makes it so that the other characters have to pretend they don't see him, and even sometimes comment on this. It was actually so funny, and I think this was so well done. The whole LARP is supposed to be set in a post-apocalyptic world, though for some reason the characters all speak with a medieval accent, decent, but honestly I think this gives it even more charm, as the various characters will all stay in character throughout the quest chain, with little moments that they break out here and there. After a few missions, Bossonius, which is your character's LARP name, takes down the Dust King in a hilarious cutscene, ending the quest chain and making you the new king of this world. Regrettably though, after this you do have to go back to the regular game, where the Saints have decided that they need to get more money, and the best way to do this is to perform a heist on the Federal Reserve cache that is guarded by our earlier friends Marshall. Nina also points out that this is probably what Los Panteros were gearing up for with their forge when we rolled up to get revenge. Taking on this mobile fortress though will be no easy task, and to do it your character suggests that we break Narwhali out of jail, the dude that we captured at the very start of the game. This gives us our second stealth section of the game, as you have to break into the prison without allowing the guards to recognize you. The mechanic here is very simple. If a guard is looking at you, a bar starts to fill up, and if it fills all the way up, you fail the mission. Otherwise, as long as you break line of sight, then you're fine. The stealth mechanics here aren't deep at all, but at the very least they work and aren't too frustrating, which compared to some other games which throw in a forced stealth section, honestly Saints Row isn't the worst thing in the world. Once you stealth your way through the prison and find Narwhali, the prison does end up going to lockdown, and you two have to work together to shoot your way out of the prison. After all this, Narwhali thanks you for granting his freedom, but does say that you are not friends, but at the least agrees to help you with your heist. After a nice little team bonding sesh, the gang gets ready for their grand heist, which ends up being a very flashy assault on the Marshall guarded train, where you and Narwhali work together. It actually plays out really similar to that earlier convoy mission that we attacked toward the start of the game, kind of working your way up this moving train. Toward the end of the mission, Sergio shows up to try and ruin the day, as Los Panteros are also here, you know, as Nina kind of thought, but in a short cutscene, Narwhali just ends up killing Sergio, thus ending the leader of Los Panteros. This is kind of an odd way to kill off a major character in the game, considering all of the other characters that would be killed off would happen in a boss fight, but I guess is what it is. The game does joke about this multiple times, that Narwhali had to kill him instead of you. After a bit more fighting to progress through the train, it does end up crashing, but we get our duffel bags full of money and gold bars. From here, the game kind of goes into another gear, as Los Panteros are mostly dealt with for the remainder of the game, outside of some random ones you might see in the open world or a side mission that you might do. With them out of the way, the Saints turn their attention to the idols, who still have the Hummingbird Codex from way earlier in the game, and decide that it is time to steal it back. After showing up to a safe house that turns out to be a trap and fighting your way out, you and Kev head out to the idols yacht, where the Codex is actually being held. On the yacht, you find the Codex, kill lots of idols, and take on 2 collective members in a single fight before escaping the now blown up yacht. This gives you another one of those sections where you just sit on the back of a vehicle and shoot all the enemies chasing after you, and eventually you end up back at the church, where you give a riveting speech to your gang about how nobody messes with the Saints.
You're goddamn right, no one. The Saints aren't a flash in the pan. We're here to stay.
The speech is honestly very cheesy, but it's culminated in the decision to throw a huge party, alluding to that party that we saw at the very start of the game. This mission ends with both the idols and Los Panteros now dealt with in terms of the main story, as the rival factions are in flux due to the loss of their leaders. From here, the story takes a pretty weird turn, where the Saints learn that due to a non-compete clause signed by you during your work for the Marshals, the whole Saints organization is actually a subsidiary of Marshall, which I'm sure made some lawyer playing through the game out there scratch their head. To deal with this new dilemma, you want to just show up and kill Atticus, but Eli explains this won't actually solve the problem since it is a legally binding document, but that doesn't actually stop us from showing up and killing a bunch of people in our way to find Atticus. During this mission, you do encounter some of these special units from Marshall, though I'm not 100% sure this is the first time that you encounter them. They might have been in the prison, but these are basically just dual-wielding cowboys that can go invisible. At the end of the day, you kind of just fight them the same way you do all the other enemies, which is just mag dump them until they die, which never really takes too long. The mission concludes with a mini boss fight against a robot with dual Gatling guns, and I would say this was an interesting fight as it seemed like it had actual mechanics, but I ended up just shooting it with an RPG about 3 times and it died, negating the need to pay attention to any of those mechanics. Once we get to the main office though, Atticus isn't there, but rather the previous board member Myra Starr, who is the person that we saved way earlier in the game, and she has a very lucrative offer for you. If you help her plummet the share price of Marshall, getting Atticus fired, fired and getting her put in charge, she will then give you full ownership of the Saints again. This actually leads to a pretty fun mission where you take control of what is supposed to be this cool AI controlled tank that Marshall has for security, and you just go around town causing a bunch of damage with it, which makes the public completely outraged and the stock price of Marshall to plummet. After copious amounts of killing and blowing things up around the town, you are given a cutscene showing the boardroom where Myra is attempting to take over as CEO, which ends up in a split vote. Luckily, for whatever reason, you're the tiebreaker here, and you're given the choice of shooting Atticus or firing him, and I obviously chose to shoot him, and you just pull out your pistol and shoot him in the head right in the middle of the board meeting, and to my surprise, not a single board member reacts to this. They just go on about their day as if this was a normal occurrence. Myra does end up holding up her end of the deal, and the Saints are now yours again, which means it is time for that grand party. The party opens up with you talking outside with Eli, Kevin, and Nina. However, they all head into the party before you, while you decide to take a little moment to take it all in, as let's be honest, it's been a very eventful couple months. Narwhali shows up and mentions that he's been thinking a lot about what you said to him previously, which was that he should join you and your friends in the Saints. Though just as the start of the game alludes to, you are betrayed here and Narwhali ends up stabbing you in the stomach before attempting to bury you alive. This is followed up by a pretty cool sequence of dream missions, which take you to a variety of different areas to fight in. Similar to the LARPing missions, I think that this section is one of the stronger sections of the game because it's where Saints Row really leans into that more crazy aspect of the game. And these missions really let the writers play with their creativity a bit more. From a weird dream sequence to a board game that you have to walk around and play to a nightmare, you work your way through the various areas until you finally reach the end and you're able to wake up, realizing that Narwhali has killed everyone at the party and stole your friends. You give him a call to figure out what's going on, and you find out that he's holding your friends captive and forcing them to be friends with him. He even made Kevin put a shirt on. Completely ridiculous. After driving across town to find some guns, you show up in that same Wild West themed area that the game opened with in a search to take down Narwhali and find your friends. You basically just go and kill a ton of Narwhali goons until there's only one remaining who is nice enough to give you the information you need. His name's actually George, and he seems like a nice guy, and you tell him to stop by the church when he wakes up, and then you give him a swift punch in the head, knocking him out. Now you know where Narwhali's hideout is. It is time for the final mission in the game. Similar to many of the other missions in this game, this just includes fighting your way through the compound, killing tons of the Narwhali goons with the help of your friends and a cat. The final boss fight here is pretty similar to other ones and kind of just has you mag dumping Narwhali until he is dead, though he does possess the special ability to be able to teleport away from you, and overall the fight is fairly easy with a couple different phases. The first phase just being a normal on foot fighting section, followed by a section where you chase him through the level, and then the final section where you have to fight a helicopter being piloted by Narwhali. After shooting some RPGs at the helicopter and attempting to not die to the various enemies that try and kill you, you eventually end up destroying the helicopter, making Narwhali jump out right before it plummets to its descent. The game concludes here with a funny Wild West showdown that has you shoot and kill Narwhali for the last time, happily ever after. After concluding the main story, the player is free to return to the open world and complete the various side missions and other remaining tasks, even having the ability to build the Saints Row skyscraper that you may remember from Saints Row 4 if you complete all of the business ventures around the city, which was something I was far too lazy to do. All in all, Saints Row 2022 isn't the terrible game that it's made out to be, but it is very clear there was a lack of direction or conflicting design throughout the development of the game, along with the horrible condition of the game on launch, with many bugs still persisting to this day. Launch date aside, I would say this game for me is probably somewhere between a 7 and a 7.5 out of 10, which is slightly better than the reviews that it received on launch, but this isn't really saying much. If you want a mindless third-person action game with some high points and some low points that will take you roughly 10 to 15 hours, then Saints Row 2022 isn't a bad game. It isn't going to blow you away or make any of those greatest games of all time lists or become a cult classic later on, but I do confidently believe that it fits into that style of game that is worth picking up on a deep sale just to play when you're bored. That said though, it is clear there were many choices made during the design of this game that completely jaded existing Saints Row fans. The choice to reboot the series with a very lackluster story, the downgrade in locale over Stillwater, and the fact that the game felt very dated by the time it released all led to why this game was received so poorly. Was this game so bad that Volition deserved to die over it? No, probably not. But in the state of gaming where it seems that almost every dev is one bad release away from being being shut down, it's not hard to see how it happened, even if it is sad. Concluding the main game leaves us with the 3 DLCs that were added in post-launch: the Heist and the Hazardous, Ketchum's Murder Circus, and a Song of Ice and Dust. So before concluding the video, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at these DLCs, as honestly, they aren't too bad. Though if you did happen to pay full price for them, I probably would be pretty upset, as the length of them is all shockingly short. The first of the DLCs was the Heist and the Hazardous, which released on May 9th of 2023. The DLC featured a new district known as Sunshine Springs, which has a very Beverly Hills type vibe. 3 new story missions, a side event, a new helicopter, a new gun, and various outfits and cosmetics. The DLC is actually pretty fun, and similar to some of the high points in the campaign, I think it does a very good job of taking a wacky idea and spinning it into a little mission chain. Though the overall length is pretty short, only taking me like 45 minutes to get through the whole thing. Though you could spend a little more time if you 100%ed the whole new area, which is not something I bothered doing. New vehicle and gun aside, the new story missions open up with you taking a bounty mission that leads you to this new region of the map. After a little bit of shooting and killing, you take out the bounty target, then making a phone call to the wanted client who wants you to show up to their house to collect your payment. And while this is very unorthodox for Saints Row contract killing etiquette, the client doesn't want to leave a paper trail, so you begrudgingly head over to their house. Upon showing up to the mansion in the hills, you find out the client is actually in-universe movie star Chris Hardy, who starred in the films named the same as the DLC. After a little bit of fanboying, you go to collect your payment, and instead of being given money, Chris just hands you an autographed photo. He says he's unable to pay you due to all of his cash being tied up in a passion project film that he has been working on for years, which was actually being held back by the dude that you just killed, so now he can finally move it ahead. And obviously because of this, you weren't getting paid. To fund the project, he plans to sell off some movie props that are supposedly worth a fortune. During all this, security catches you off guard, knocking you out, and then chucks you over the edge into the very weirdly colored river. Like, it's kind of green, I'm not sure why. When you wake up, you are rightfully pissed off, and realizing you can't just go and kill a movie star, though let's be honest, in the Saints Row universe you probably could, you devise the plan with your friends to rob him blind. To do this, you're going to perform a heist of all those valuable movie props that you just saw, which Chris is planning to auction off very soon. All of the props are locked in a vault secured by face and voice recognition, and also heavily guarded by martial forces. So to be able to steal these props, we are going to have to steal Chris's identity. To use this, we're going to be using a hologram, which after taking some photos and recording Chris's voice, we can fully assume his identity. To get these pictures and voice recordings, we show up to where Chris is supposed to have lunch, and while the plan doesn't go exactly to plan, you kind of cosplay as a paparazzi, taking some pictures of Chris from the distance. And after you get the pictures, you prepare for the final heist. You show up to the event using your hologram that allows you to look and sound just like Chris Hardy, even mingling with some of the guests in the lobby, having some pretty funny conversations. Long story short, after some various tasks, we kill a bunch of martial forces before escaping to the roof where you leave in a helicopter. You then use this helicopter to protect Nina and Kev, who are transporting all of these stolen goods, and at the same time we attempt to cause a bunch of destruction to Marshall so that they send Chris a huge bill, bankrupting him. The mission ends with Chris in disarray due to the sequence of events, and he even has to sell his house to try and pay all the bills that you caused. This mansion ends up being the Sunshine Springs mini HQ, and you get to keep it and can use it as a fast travel location, along with going there to upgrade your weapons or just change your clothes. Overall, the Heist and Hazardous is pretty fun, and it does also include a new wingsuit flying event, but the short length of it would have made me a lot more harsh had I actually paid full price for the DLC upon its release. Next up came Ketchum's Murder Circus, which was released on July 6th of 2023. The Murder Circus is Saints Row's spin on a roguelike style mode. Remember Boot Hill that I mentioned from earlier? Well, this DLC reuses that area and premise to create a totally new mode known as Murder Circus. The DLC also includes a couple new weapons and a new Molotov ability on top of the new game mode. Murder Circus is actually pretty fun, and it provides a decent amount of replayability, assuming you enjoy the core combat loop of Saints Row. Murder Circus provides you with 4 new characters that you can level up in the mode, where each run allows you to try and complete a handful of objectives before engaging in a final fight. Though if you die before completing all of this, the run is over and you have to restart, very similar to other roguelites. You do gain experience and Boot Hill coins on each run, so you can use these to upgrade your characters and unlock different things for future runs. The mode is actually fairly fleshed out, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was a testing bed for a Saints Row spin-off, similar to other games that have taken DLCs and turned them into full spin-offs, like Tiny Tina's Wonderland in the Borderlands series. Similar to the previous DLC though, the runtime on this one wasn't too long for me before getting my fill, though this one does have a lot more replayability if you want it, since it is a roguelike. Each of the 4 characters has a unique weapon and ability, and during these runs you are tasked with completing the 4 Caskets of Chaos. Each of these Caskets of Chaos will bring on a set number of enemies to attack you, and then reward you with a passive upon completion that will buff your character for the rest of the run. The Murder Circus also has these loot boxes scattered around the arena called dock boxes that you can find and open, giving you a special weapon to take on your foes, though unlike your main weapon, ammo on these weapons you get out of the boxes are limited. I had the best luck with the character that sported dual SMGs, but between the 4 characters there is a variety of playstyles. And last but not least, we have probably the best DLC, A Song of Ice and Dust, that was released on August 8th, 2023, not even a month before Volition was shut down. This is the longest of the DLCs in terms of actual story content and includes 4 new weapons, 4 new vehicles, and a bunch of new cosmetics and unlockables. Remember the LARPing missions that were a highlight of the main story? That is expanded on here with the whole DLC focused on that idea, and with it being about 5 missions long, ran me closer to an hour and a half. Still somewhat short in the grand scheme of things, but probably double the length of the Heist and the Hazardous. The story opens up with you, Bosonius, being married to Gwen in an attempt to unite the 2 houses, until you are ambushed by a new clan known as the Ice Tribe, taking out most of the people in attendance of the wedding, including your friends Kevin, Nina, and Eli, forcing you and Gwen to begrudgingly work together in an attempt to stay alive. The DLC does reuse a lot of the unique animations that were present during the main game, but also includes those new weapons and vehicles mentioned earlier, and even sports a whole new area known as the Dust Fair Games, which is like this universe's version of a Renaissance fair. After doing some fair games like a little murder mystery and some kart racing in order to earn enough tickets, you're able to purchase a Speak with Dead potion, giving you the ability to talk to the lore master who was taken down during that previous ambush. Doing this allows us to learn a little bit about the history of the clans, where we find out that the 3 clans that we encountered during the main game had all worked together to banish the Chill Queen from the Dustlands due to her inability to follow the rules. She would then go on in exile to create her own LARP in the neighboring lands of Meeker City, whatever that is, and to protect themselves from the Chill Queen coming back, each of the founders would craft an item of power suited to their house. During her ambush, the Chill Queen took one of the items and would be attempting to take the other 2 in order to reclaim the Dustlands. Thus takes you to the next mission, where you're attempting to transport one of those items, the Bower Rod, though while originally you think you did a good job, you find out this was all a setup, and the Chill Queen ends up stealing the item, now giving her 2 of the 3 items. With 2 items of power in her possession, you and Gwen actually head to the last house in hopes to use their item to stop the Chill Queen, only to find out that they've declared neutrality in the conflict against the Dust Queen. Because of this, you and Gwen decide to just go and steal the last item, and after a funny stealth section and a little bit of combat, we actually find out that the prior king that we killed during the end of the mission arc during the main game actually stole their item of power out of the game altogether. Due to his bitterness of being killed by you previously, he gave the item of power to the Chill Queen, giving her possession of all 3 items of power, making her in theory unstoppable. To combat this, the House of Sandy Kraken, which is your house, are going to create their own item of power, and in an abridged and sped up ceremony before the Chill Queen's final assault. Due to most of the Dust Fair staff not liking the Chill Queen, they help you with this sped up ceremony, and the new banhammer is forged. A very fun weapon that allows you to throw a hammer at people, and after a few charges, slam the hammer down onto the ground, killing all around with an AoE ability. With your new banhammer, Gwen and Bosonius prepare for the final strike and attempt to defend the fair from her foes. During this fight, your friends Eli, Nina, and Kevin return after leveling up their new characters, and together with your newly crafted banhammer, are able to hold off her forces, leading to one final battle to defeat the Chill Queen for good. Funnily enough, this boss fight is probably the only actual boss fight where mechanics mattered, and you would have to destroy one of those items of power, the bones, to break her invulnerability, allowing you to do any damage, while also avoiding the roar of the Bower Rod right down the middle of the fight. It's not an overly complex boss fight by any means, but it's a fun way to end the DLC, and it concludes with the Chill Queen trying to take you out, until Gwen actually jumps in the way, saving your life and dying in the process. You then defeat the Chill Queen and revive Gwen, and thus concludes the DLC, and at this point, the entire game. Overall, I had a fun time with Saints Row. Will I go back and replay it? No, probably not. But for a one-time playthrough, this game can be a fairly fun time. While the game was 100% a letdown, I do wish we could have seen Volition tackle another project, as I feel they did a good job of making some fairly unique games throughout their lifespan. Though their 3-game run of Saints Row Gat Out of Hell, Agents of Mayhem, and then the Saints Row Reboot definitely wasn't doing them any favors for staying afloat. And that is going to do it for the video. There was a few things I didn't mention during the script just because honestly I didn't know where to put them. One being that the Saints Row Reboot does have co-op. Now I don't know if the co-op is broken or what, but every time I tried to join a matchmaking co-op game, I would just get declined by the host, so I never actually got to play it, and I couldn't actually convince any of my friends to play the Saints Row co-op. So we didn't play any co-op. I don't think it would have changed my opinion of the game too much, but I do imagine it would make it a slightly more fun experience to play through the game with a friend. On top of that, the graphics. I didn't mention the graphics during the script. They're not amazing. You don't need me to tell you that. I'm not a huge graphics person anyways. But yeah, Saints Row 2022 doesn't look like it really came out in 2022. Probably looks like it came out in the previous generation, if we're being honest. And that's pretty much it. My voice is absolutely shot. I've been super sick. I hope it wasn't too hard to listen to, but I appreciate you if you did. I'd like to give a big shout out to all the supporters over on Patreon. And with that said, I'll see you all next time.